Welcome to the Rimworld mod rundown. We'll be taking a quick look at what you can expect to see from vanilla Gravship Expanded Chapter 1. For starters, you'll need the Odyssey DLC as well as the additional workshop content, Vanilla Expanded Framework and Harmony. Welcome to a brand new series of the Rimworld mod rundown. It's still going to include what you've come to know these videos for, a visual and auditory information dump of the mentioned mod, only now we're doing it with less cutaways and I'm relying more on my own writing. You know, some actual creativity. This is technically series 3 of the rundown, as I tweaked some of the formula a while back too. So if you want to leave a little bit of feedback on the direction that it's going and how it's evolving, that would be appreciated. Anyway, onto the mod. The timing for this video is actually pretty good. I did my Rimworld problem and Rimworld solution coverage not too long ago, mentioning the main issues that I found with the Gravship and how it interacted within the mechanics of Rimworld, with it rewarding avoiding engaging with challenges that the game presents to you. So fingers crossed by the end of this rundown we'll have another potential solution in our pocket that helps us avoid the urge to slap the launch button like it's the subscribe button on this channel. Did you know that only 24% of you are... First and foremost, Gravship Expanded has been very clearly designed with a certain playstyle in mind, and focuses on more engaging and involved mechanics when utilising a Gravship, as well as making the orbital layout considerably more detailed and interesting too. With that being said, this shifts enough mechanics of the game that of course it's not going to be to everyone's taste, which is absolutely fine. You're allowed to not enjoy something, nobody's forcing you to use this. At the same time, moaning that you dislike it in the workshop comments is meaningless. If you don't enjoy coffee, then you wouldn't take time out of your day to stand outside of a Costa or Starbucks and shout at the employees. So don't do it online either, you look like a dumbass. Equally, if you haven't played Odyssey or don't understand the core mechanics that it introduced, a lot of this stuff is likely going to go straight over your head. My rundown of the Odyssey DLC goes into exact detail about all of the mechanics that Gravship Expanded is building on top of. So if by some miracle you're watching this and don't actually get how Gravships work, maybe watch that video first. For now, this is Chapter 1, which is overhauling the Gravship, tech tree, orbital layer and events, as well as adding in mechanics for oxygen, astrofuel, heat and dedicated Gravship weaponry. Chapter 2 of Gravship Expanded is set to include enemy Gravships, larger weapons, shields, new combat gear, more mechanoid stations and space insects. So, whilst you will be getting some of the combat potential in Chapter 1, the majority of the blasty smashy goodness is coming later, with that date simply being set in 2026 currently. With these overhauls for Chapter 1 in mind, Gravships is now considerably more investment heavy. You'll unlock them later into a run, with the idea being that they are the centrepiece of that colony, the crown jewel. Yes, you could make and use a simple small craft in Gravship Expanded, but even then they're going to be more mechanically involved than building a moderate or even large size Gravship in vanilla. Gravship Expanded will also allow you to spend more time just chilling in space, throwing more challenges your way as well as harder challenges. Expanded is designed around complexity, progression and time investment. If you want to keep Gravships as something that you can, for the most part, throw together and get working in a couple of days, you probably want to stick with the standard Odyssey gameplay. Normally in a rundown like this, I would go tech by tech and build out a ship with the new parts as we unlock them. However, research itself has been drastically overhauled for Gravship Expanded. I'm going to get really bored of saying that. From now on we're calling it GE, alright? Anyway, breaking it down tech by tech will still have us bouncing back and forth a little too much for my liking. So instead, when I mention a part or mechanic, the corresponding project or source will be shown here, in the top right of the screen. We will still look at the tech tree in full, but I'll do the unique research mechanic for it at the same time. First things first, something super easy to go over. The UI for building Gravship parts is now using the Better Architect menu layout. If you're a fan of how this works, I would strongly recommend checking out the mod itself by Fernie, with it supporting close to about 900 mods worth of content, meaning that chances are if you have something that adds any structures into your game, this will organise the parts in a way that makes sense and save you a boatload of time scrolling and scanning through menus. The starting scenario with a Gravship has been slightly changed. It's now called the Gravjumper and it features the smallest class of ship included with GE. What do I mean by class of ships? We'll get to that in a bit. For now, just know that the starting ship has a different design, as well as some parts that you don't yet have the ability to build. So maybe don't get too trigger happy deconstructing parts of your Gravjumper right away. This change also carries over to the Grav engine debris quest that you would normally get in a colony that doesn't start with the Gravship scenario. Now, rather than being bombarded by parts of a ship, an absolutely scuffed Gravjumper will land on your tile with some mechanoids in hot pursuit, provided that you've got electricity researched and it's been at least 30 days since you started the game. Whilst this will land with some functional parts, you do need to do a fair amount of rebuilding to get this thing operational again. Studying the engine works just like it does in vanilla, unlocking the most basic Gravship tech to get you started. So let's go over how research has changed. Gravtech now has its own entire tree, with 11 projects in total, one of which you basically get as a freebie by looking at the engine. Whilst initially the research requirements for these parts may seem crazy low, Gravtech progression doesn't use standard research anymore. After all, how are your colonists going to understand the complexities of low orbital flight if they only ever keep their feet on the ground? Selecting a Gravtech project will display a message that your future launches now provide grav data towards that technology. So what is grav data and how do we get it? Simple, just fly around for a bit, get a feel for the ship and how it controls, what problems it may face, how the grav engine interacts with the world. Each launch is going to generate grav data, with it providing more the further that you travel. So a short hop doesn't exactly give you much time to gather information, but firing yourself halfway across the world gives you a good chunk of data to work on. This grav data can be increased by building certain structures on your ship, but it could also be lost entirely if you have a bad mishap upon landing. You do need a research project selected for this data to be put to use. If you want to get the most bang for your buck earning grav data right away, you're going to want to get all of the thrusters possible down and launch as far as you can every single time. Just remember that any data points earned over what is required to complete a project are wasted. Everything not saved will be lost after all. There are 3 buildings that interact with the amount of grav data you collect. The largest contribution can be gained from the Gravtech console. You'll have already made it halfway up the tech tree before you unlock this, so you can't exactly rush the project to make future unlocks easier. Costing just 100 steel and 6 components, this increases the amount of data earned from launch by 500%. What you'll also find with a lot of these new parts in GE is that they're able to draw power directly from the grav engine rather than needing to be powered by external sources and batteries. This addition alone makes me enjoy GE considerably more than vanilla grav ships, as you're no longer dedicating 20% of your ship to placing power solutions. The other 2 parts are earned as rewards, similar to how there were unique Gravship pieces to find and install in Vanilla Odyssey. The flight computer generates additional grav data per tile travelled, with a Gravship able to support 2 of these at once. The bonus is multiplicative with the console too, so adding a flight computer will take a small jump from 3 to 5 points of data, with the final result then being around 25 points thanks to a console. Essentially the math is working in your favour for this one. The console is doing its thing at the end of the calculation rather than only impacting the baseline data. Finally, to help with research, there's a black box. This is another multiplicative bonus, so that 25 points we'd have earned from a flight computer and a console is now 50, meaning that just a few bits of research equipment will help you fill out the tech tree in rapid time. As well as it helping with the data that you earn, it also provides a place to store data that would have otherwise been wasted. If you don't have a project selected, or if you're earning more data than the current project requires, those points can be stored in the black box and applied to a future project instead. Gotta say, I do love a black box, and the structure is pretty helpful too. So we're earning that data, progressing up the initial bit of the tech tree. Let's go over why our baseline ship is different and what that actually means mechanically. It's a little bit more involved than you might have expected. We start with a Gravjumper. This is the smallest of the 3 new classes introduced in GE. As you can probably tell, it's a smaller engine and a trimmed down pilot console, now called the cockpit. If you're not sure what one of those is, go ask your mum. These new, smaller parts are designed to interact with one another without crossover. That's to say, small engines will not work with a larger pilot console, just like a larger engine does not function with a cockpit. The Gravjumper engine itself can support up to 100 tiles of substructure with an 8 tile radius, and an onboard power output of 2400 watts, which is pretty nice. The power output provided by the different class of grav cores scales depending on how close to the limit of substructure you are. As such, keeping your Gravjumper tiny allows the core to power lights, temperature, and maybe even a bench on board. If you max out what flooring it can support, you'll always need to add dedicated power solutions to keep things running. You'll have unlocked the most basic of basic parts by studying this Gravjumper engine, so you're always going to be able to build the bare minimum to get the thing operational. We'll go over the parts themselves in more detail after covering the 3 classes and the changes here. First and foremost, the launch ritual is different between the 3 classes. The majority of the success chance for the jump comes from the pilot, co-pilot, and any sub-persona cores you have installed, if you're lucky enough to have got some anyway. The launch is still impacted by other factors though. Crew count, small thrusters, large thrusters, giant thrusters, sub-persona cores, pilots, co-pilot, and average maintenance, which is another mechanic to cover later. For now, just know that a poorly maintained Gravjumper isn't the end of the world, unless its average maintenance is basically in the toilet. Distance travelled plays no part in the cooldown length for the Gravjumper, with it always having a fairly quick turnaround. You'll find that the biggest improvements to that cooldown timer, once you start pushing launch quality, come above 60%. This can be tricky because such a large percentage of that quality with a Gravjumper is coming from your pilot and co-pilot. You're unlikely to have access to anything besides small thrusters at this point too. Just know that for a Gravjumper, you'll be quite literally bouncing across the planet once you have a decent colonist at the helm. The standard Gravship is the second class. This is what you'll be used to from Vanilla Odyssey. A 3x3 footprint engine supporting up to 250 substructure, a 12 cell radius, and a maximum power output of 4800 watts, making it potentially more powerful than a geothermal generator. This level of ship is unlocked with standard Gravtech, needing to be paired with the pilot console to function. The cooldown curve for the Gravship is very different to the Gravjumper, with the first 40% or so providing the most meaningful impact to cooldown reduction, and any further quality gained providing less of an offset as it goes on. This launch ritual also includes more rolls and more parts than the Gravjumper did, with it now being impacted by the crew count, small thrusters, large thrusters, giant thrusters, pilot sub-persona, co-pilot console, pilot ability, co-pilot ability, Gravtech Researcher ability, Gravtech Engineer ability, and the average maintenance of the ship. So now we've got 2 extra roles assisting with the launch, as well as a dedicated co-pilot console that can provide 10% additional quality. The issue is, this co-pilot console is tucked away in the very tippy top of the tech tree, so this isn't something you're likely to benefit from for quite some time. The co-pilot console also only gives that 10% buff. It can't be used as another location to launch the ship, meaning you still need your lead pilot to make it to the primary console and press the buttons before you can escape from a tile. Now, to go with those 2 additional roles, you'll find that colonists also have a Gravship Maintenance and a Gravship Research stats on their information screen. The maintenance ability is impacted by the construction skill, as well as consciousness, manipulation, and sight, with sight being capped at 100% max, so you can still squeeze out a little bit of extra impact with drugs or bionic limbs here. Gravship Research is impacted by global work speed, intellectual skill, consciousness, and sight, with none of these values being capped either. So again, if you wanted to, you can get a benefit from implants or stimulants if needed. These extra roles give a much greater benefit to keeping a varied and skilled crew on board, rather than just having one god tier pilot that can do a 20 parsec route in just 12. The Gravhulk is the final class, unlocked with the last tech. The Gravhulk engine is massive, as is the bridge required to pilot a ship with one of these installed. Taking 5x5 space, this engine grants 500 base substructure support, a 20 cell radius, and it outputs 7,200 watts of power at its peak. The Gravhulk has the most linear relationship between launch quality and cooldown, with there being a more equal pressure applied across the entire ship in terms of contribution to that launch. The Gravhulk is impacted by crew count, large thrusters, giant thrusters, pilot sub-personas, co-pilot console, pilot ability, co-pilot ability, Gravtech Researcher ability, Gravtech Engineer ability, and again, the average maintenance of the ship. The Hulk also has the largest range of cooldowns. One thing to mention for all of these ships is that regardless of size, they still consume 5 fuel per tile. So even though you might be launching a piddly little 3-man craft with only the essentials on board, it's drinking astrofuel just as quickly as a Borg cube, transporting a planet's worth of yayo and toys for the local orphanage. You decide if that sentence needs a comma or not. With these new ships, we also have new mishaps that can occur from lower quality rituals. There are 4 that you already know from base game: minor crash, thruster breakdown, overheated engine, and grav nausea. Nothing crazy there. However, there are 8 new problems that you can face. You might have an oxygen leak occur, dumping the contents of its tank and requiring it to be repaired before it can start storing O2 again. Yes, oxygen is actually going to be a mechanic now too. Don't worry, we'll go over it soon. Your vac barriers can flicker, which, given how you're likely to have placed them, is going to compromise the pressurization on a portion of your ship. Just like the oxygen tank, this needs repairing to make it functional again. If you're launching off planet and intend to be chilling in low orbit for a bit, consider preemptively equipping a vac suit or pressurized armor to avoid disaster if an event like this strikes. Whilst it's unlikely to make your entire grav ship shit the bed and suffocate an entire crew, depending how you've placed your barriers and which ones fail, this could lead to your vac resistant equipment being stuck in a depressurized area. Grav data corruption is an especially nasty negative to get early on if you planned a huge trip to get the data you needed to build your ship up a little bit more, as this mishap simply corrupts any data you would have earned for that journey. An astrofuel pipe rupture can be exceptionally dangerous. It's a new resource that we'll go over in more detail later, but it's probably best described as chem fuel on go juice. If this stuff ever starts to burn, things get hot, and the last thing you need is a pipeline rupture in a room that is storing all of your fuel. Make sure you've got fire foam unlocked before committing to making an unstable explosive portion of your ship. Unwanted attention can be a pretty serious negative, potentially one of the most dangerous depending on when and how you hit it. Nearby raiders have spotted your approach and move in to attack your ship before you have a chance to reprime the engine. This is an event that gets around the problem of being able to just run away from danger, because your engine is still going to be on cooldown and there is no guarantee that the raid that comes now is any easier than the one that you just ran away from previously. The vermin infestation can go from being hilarious if you're using CE to potentially catastrophic if you play with standard combat. Rats have snuck on board the grav ship and spill out from the ventilation system when you land, with a large number of trivial enemies being extremely capable of causing annoying scars and nibbling off toes and fingers if you play with that standard combat. Even more dangerous is that these rats might appear in an area like a classroom or a nursery, which is great for earning kids a little bit of combat experience as they club vermin to death, but not so great when they nearly die to dozens of scratches and the subsequent infection. Critical heat spikes are another mishap that interacts with a new mechanic of structural heat. Newton's third law is a bitch, and your grav ship isn't immune to it. Not only that, the engine itself can malfunction and put out significantly more heat than intended, causing heatstroke and superheated air risks aboard your grav ship until the temperature settles. Finally, you have grav turbulence. This hits a little bit differently to a minor crash or a breakdown, as it specifically targets the maintenance percentage on your grav ship components, which isn't quite as simple as blowtorching a few damaged walls or swapping out the components on thrusters. Maintenance takes a little bit of time to find the loose or worn parts, as well as replace any screws or fixtures that may have shaken themselves out. But it's not all bad news with GE. As well as launch mishaps, now you can also experience a launch boon. You might spot a landmark in the distance whilst travelling, unlocking a new location to visit on your map. You could also uncover a rich deposit. Should you wish to go there and collect it, these deposits will require deep drills to access. There's a chance to encounter a caravan upon landing, immediately giving you an opportunity to offload some of your cargo or collect any supplies that you may be low on. Your pilot might decide to show off, landing with a perfect trajectory after executing an especially economical trip, which will greatly reduce the fuel consumption of the trip itself. This is especially beneficial when you're rocking a Gravhulk that's travelling max distance regularly. Your ship itself can also resonate perfectly during a trip, leading to what's known as Gravship Harmony. Normally a jump is going to inflict a little bit of wear and tear on all of your components that have a maintenance need. With this boon, the grav field was aligned so perfectly that it results in no vibrations or jolts to all parts installed on the ship, meaning there's no additional maintenance requirement upon landing. If your colonists decide to scan up rather than down whilst travelling, they may discover a nearby asteroid, rich with valuable minerals for you to go and mine out. And finally, you might experience what's known as crew euphoria. Just like a perfectly timed base drop when you're rolling on ease, this brings the entire crew together in high spirits as their celebration echoes throughout the ship's corridors. Now, it wouldn't be a VE mod if it didn't tweak all of the parts, right? So of course we've got some changes to things like tile destruction, landing, and space too. Tiles are no longer obliterated when your gravship launches, which never really made sense anyway, right? Given that friendly caravans will be totally unharmed if you launched, experiencing 0 relationship penalty, but apparently the mountainside base that you carved to make a few bedrooms totally collapsed and made the local area unlivable. Of course, if there's no more destruction, that must mean that the Grav Anchor is now surplus to requirement. Because of that, it's been readjusted to provide a new benefit instead. It's still an expensive bit of kit, but it now protects gravships landing on that location from triggering their engine cooldown, as well as helping with a 20% bonus to launch quality and improving fuel efficiency by 25% when landing on a tile with it present. Basically, if you use your gravship more like a supersized shuttle, regularly returning to a home base tile, this is going to help massively with the cost of doing so and with the availability of your travel. The changes to landing hits 2 things. Firstly, you can now land on things. So whilst you could squash trees and animals in vanilla, with GE you can also crush walls and ruins. This is primarily here because if you build a Gravhulk, chances are you're going to need to smash things to land successfully. It's balanced out by inflicting damage to the parts of your ship that you use to perform a crash landing, with this damage being based on the object health. So you'll want to be careful about smashing your entire gravship into a granite mountain, for example. Ideally, this is a mechanic you use in case of emergency, not something you actively try to do, unless you really enjoy giving your builders a lot of maintenance tasks. The other change that comes with landing is the ability to land in space without needing a POI, provided that you have a certain quest reward structure anyway. This also opens up the opportunity to use some of your Gravship Weaponry with this mod and batter enemy positions. Again, more on that later when we actually get to it. In order to land in empty space, you're going to need to find a grav lift from a quest. Not only does it allow you to chill in a completely clear map, meaning your tick rate is going to be super crisp, this grav lift also reduces the damage from crash landing your ship by half, and it prevents substructure from becoming damaged upon crash landing. This doesn't mean sub-scaffolding is immune to breaking, only that you won't need to replace busted substructure tiles on a rough landing. You'll also see that when landing in empty space maps, you're now able to very slowly traverse the space itself with your colonists. It has a walking speed of around 2.6%, making it exceptionally dangerous to traverse without a vac suit due to the time that you'll spend slowly floating. But this new interaction allows you to explore everything on an orbital platform or asteroid, regardless of anything that might have been previously cut off or had blocked pathing. This is a great time to break out the jump packs if you have them, as they'll allow you to rapidly cover huge distances of space and kite enemies to all kinds of nonsense situations. Landing in space is now also more interactive, with a new selection of orbital events and some fresh locations to explore. In terms of locations, nearly everything is a variation of an asteroid. I think of them as biomes for space in some way, as they give you a little bit of visual variety to where you land and provide some different building opportunities if you choose to try and settle one. You have ice asteroids, which use frozen walls and flooring rather than vac stone, making them exceptionally easy to mine out if you want to clean sweep the place before building a base. The asteroid clusters spawn with a few large areas to explore, meaning that you need to either land between them and use your ship to bridge the gap, or slowly float between them to collect all the resources. Asteroid fields work in a similar way, only with considerably more small chunks and extremely limited building space. Porous asteroids spawn in with multiple dents, holes and gaps, making them a little bit scuffed for building but much quicker for strip mining, as you'll be able to exploit those pockets and quickly navigate through the internals of the map. Giant asteroids are, well, giant. They usually spawn in with so much floor space that they can even clip the edge of the map limits and suddenly cut off. This is the kind of asteroid that you'd want to settle on if you have plans on making a massive space fortress. Shattered asteroids are similar in nature to clusters, though they typically have less floor space and larger gaps between the chunks that spawn, making it an absolute mission to float between them. You'll know a dense asteroid when you see one because it's going to have tied flags to the nearby lampposts and lowered the local property values. These are small but incredibly valuable asteroids, normally brimming with a luxury resource if they mention traces of it, so especially useful for plasteel and uranium. Small asteroids are, well, nah, I'm not doing this again. They lack the material density of the previous asteroid. They're still easy to dig through and explore and find the resources that they've spawned with. Weirdly, these spots can make for a great little orbital outpost, as they force you to keep the local value down and allow you to make really good use of Archaean trees, ensuring their wealth doesn't spiral out of control and invite ridiculous raids while still being sustainable. The asteroid with ruins is half asteroid, half destroyed station, so you're going to find some furniture, crates, destroyed fortified walls, and potentially even a sealed pod within it. They make for a worthwhile stopping point to catch your breath and grab a little bit of loot before moving on. They would be quite difficult to renovate into a base, however, due to the massive amount of damage that the station has suffered and the mining requirement to hollow out the rest of it. The derelict station is pretty much free loot. It'll be in a much more stripped state than a station used in Odyssey, but there are still pool tables, sofas, TVs, and if you live exclusively in space, wooden furniture for deconstruction, which is hard to come by normally. It's another site that might contain sealed crates, ancient pods, or even shuttle wrecks if you want to go poking your nose around and see what loot you might find. Finally, there is a site linked to a new quest type, a solid core asteroid. Now, I've been able to fire both the quest and generate the site via dev mode, but I've yet to have it occur naturally in my own playthrough, so I can't speak to if it appears in the quest log naturally over time, or if this is specifically generated by that positive launch event, the asteroid discovery. These have a chunk of riches within, spawning with one large cluster at the very centre, making it exceptionally easy to mine straight to it, hollow it out, and leave. No more wasting time fruitlessly searching through random chunks of rock in the hopes of hitting something valuable. Whilst exploring these sites, you may also experience some of the new orbital events too. Space is no longer limited to just one or two things happening on repeat, giving you a more fleshed out experience if you actually stay in orbit for a considerable amount of time. Starting with the negatives, you've got Micro Meteor Rain, which sounds like a summon ability from Final Fantasy if ever I've heard of one. These really are tiny meteors too. You aren't going to see explosions and crashes happening all over your ship, just a lot of pitter-patter and constant tapping. Anything that might be living, or mechanoid, unlucky enough to be caught out without a roof over its head is going to have a very different experience though, as these tiny flying shards of rock and debris rapidly cause cuts. You need to be careful and make sure that your colonists aren't traversing parts of your gravship that might be unroofed during this time, such as a solar farm or a shuttle bay. After a day or two, this rain will pass. Whilst a solar flare in Vanilla Odyssey did nothing to orbital colonies or gravships, as it specifically mentioned that the planet was bombarded with solar radiation, it's not quite the same case in GE. Solar flares aren't a risk to your electronics, just anything with skin, sweat glands, and a preference to not be on fire. If your gravship takes on this kind of temperature, it's easily enough for the air to become superheated, so as bizarre as it may seem, when you're normally trying to heat up your ship in the minus 75 degree atmosphere, you're actually going to need some functional coolers on board to keep everything safe. or at least provide enough insulation to your freezer so that people can huddle in it whilst waiting out the inferno. Typically, you only need to survive a day or so before this passes. It's just a very nerve-wracking day. Space debris will throw larger projectiles your way, with the size of your ship or base largely determining how dangerous this event is for you. The chunks themselves are quite sparse, but they come bowling across the tile and collide with anything that gets in their way, be that a Gravship wall, a thruster, or a spacewalking colonist. As you can see, the larger your ship, the more impacts you're likely going to tank, which means extra repair work and potentially a breach or two. Small ships might get lucky with this and avoid the chunks of debris entirely. Fortunately, this event only lasts about 12 hours. Then we have the most lethal projectiles in the form of an asteroid shower. These are exceptionally dangerous as they behave like space debris, but they aren't limited in their approach direction, meaning they can, and will, slam into your Gravship from every possible angle. These asteroid showers also appear to be far more densely populated than the space debris event, leading to more frequent strikes, breaches, injuries, and totally broken structures. The final major negative is a toxic dust cloud, your toxic fallout equivalent in space. This obscures the sun, leading to the outdoors dropping to 0% light, as well as causing anybody that's been caught outdoors without a suit that provides solid toxic resistance taking very quick ticks of build-up. Any Gravship parts that are exposed outdoors take 5 times the normal maintenance loss. Fortunately, thrusters that you've built a roof over are technically considered indoors, but if you've been placing things like your heat sinks outdoors to avoid them warming up the interior of the ship, they're going to be very quickly clogged and scratched. Of course, toxic dust will kill any plants that are growing outdoors, but very few plants can survive outdoors when you live in space. For minor events, we'll start with the gravitational anomaly. This is both positive and negative. You're going to be locked out of launching your Gravship whilst this is in effect, but you'll be earning 2 grav data per minute whilst it's happening. That is in real-time minutes though, not in game, otherwise this would max out the tech tree with a single occurrence. This makes it really helpful to progress your Gravship development, but not ideal if you get this event on a mechanoid platform or a pirate outpost and can't escape their reinforcements. It's especially dangerous if you play with fire and try to run down the timer for chasing mechanoids. There's a standard dust cloud that can occur in space too. This doesn't increase the maintenance need, but it will obscure the sun, dropping ranged accuracy for both colonists and any Gravship weaponry. Whilst it does make ranged threats next to useless against you, it's going to be equally hard for you to land a meaningful attack on them. The last minor event is the escape pod. If you thought it was frustrating when a drop pod raid landed directly in your freezer or nursery, you'll be super happy to have this turd come crash landing aboard your ship and depressurizing a room. In order to see what you get, you're going to have to hack the pod open. It isn't always a person either. The vast majority of time it appears to be a resource delivery that you either intercepted by being in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place, depending on if anybody died when the ceiling was caved in for 75 steel. Finally, there's one positive event for seeing a comet. This works similarly to an aurora event, so anyone stood in an area that's considered outdoors while this event occurs will be given a mood buff. Alright, time for some new parts that you can build as well as the mechanics that they're going to be interacting with. As I mentioned at the top of this video, this won't always be on a project by project basis. So check the top right of the screen if you want to see the source of each part as it's introduced. Your selection of thrusters has been slightly expanded, with the benefit that they offer also being slightly tweaked. These stats and limits are shared across all classes of Gravship too. So a Gravjumper isn't limited to only using small thrusters. They can stack everything and fly across the entire world if you'd like. Small thrusters increase the range by 6, with a maximum of 10 supported. Whilst you can place more than 10 on a ship, any thrusters over that capacity provide no benefit. A change that was made with GE is that all thrusters now increase the substructure support multiplicatively, with every small thruster adding a single extra percentage. So if you have a full suite of small thrusters, you'll see a 10% bonus to your Gravship's substructure support total. Large thrusters increase range by 10, with a maximum of 6 installed at once. Just like the small thruster, these help with substructure too, with each large thruster providing a 5% bonus. That's a 30% increase when you have them all placed on board. This is especially useful if you're tight on grav cores to make additional extenders, as filling out your thruster setup will help in squeezing out an additional room or two worth of support. Finally, for thrusters, you have the giant thruster, a brand new addition for your grav ship. Each one of these is incredibly expensive and it takes 3x3 floor space, but it's also going to increase grav ship range by 20 tiles and boost substructure support by 10% per thruster, with up to 4 being supported on a ship. That means with all of the thrusters available to you, you can increase your substructure by 80% of what it would normally support. And not only that, the thrusters themselves don't even need to be functional for that bonus to be applied. So if you don't have the fuel to fire all of them and make an extremely long jump, you will still benefit from the bonus to your substructure size. Given that we're talking about the substructure and its support, let's go over some changes to those systems as well as covering the new expanders to help bring out your inner pyrocynical. Grav field extenders are pretty much as you remember them. 100 additional support for each one placed, up to 10 supported per grav engine, and they provide a 13 tile radius to build upon. Grav field amplifiers, however, are a new beast entirely. Each one of these grants 200 additional support, with up to 4 being allowed per grav ship. These have a larger radius too, reaching across 23 tiles. Because they're a 3x3 structure, you can eke out just a little bit more reach by using a field extender to build out the substructure as needed, so that the centre of the amplifier sits on the very edge of the radius offered by the grav engine. This may only be one extra tile, but don't feel like you need to have the entire amplifier within the boundary of your grav engine. Placing these also changes where your grav field extenders are allowed to be placed too, as amplifiers are able to support extenders. This allows you to do some daisy chaining to make your ships incredibly long rather than needing to build out in all directions. Just be aware that building like this is likely to result in more crash landing situations, as the game cannot accommodate your lengthy buoy being unleashed on the planet's surface. Substructure is pretty much as you would remember it in terms of cost and function, only now it can actually be damaged and even destroyed. So your grav ship flooring isn't quite as hardy as it used to be. The part that is new here is sub-scaffolding. This does not count towards the support limit for your grav ship, making it exceptionally useful for exterior walkways or connecting platforms. Due to that huge upside though, it understandably comes with a few caveats. Firstly, the only structures that scaffolding can support are solar panels. A room built using scaffolding as a floor will not be able to pressurize. Colonists walking over it will suffer a significant movement penalty, and perhaps most importantly, scaffolding is destroyed immediately when it comes under any explosive fire or takes any damage during a crash landing. So while sub-scaffolding can be extremely useful, you don't exactly want to connect an entire wing of your ship to the core purely using sub-scaffolding, as it makes it especially vulnerable to being cut off from your primary craft. With parts that are that fragile, this is a good spot to mention the new maintenance mechanic. If you played around with the generator from Quests Expanded or watched my video on it, the system might already be familiar to you. Gravship components don't break down immediately or randomly like base game generators or workbenches. So if you're staying on top of all your maintenance tasks, you aren't going to be burning through components to keep a large gravship operational. However, this maintenance need is found on basically all gravship parts, with it slowly depleting over time, or sometimes rapidly depleting if you get a mishap that shakes everything loose after landing. A part that falls below 70% maintenance is going to be automatically scheduled for a tune-up, with any colonist assigned to construction treating that job as a priority, as it comes first in the work type. If a part has been ignored or has suffered extreme loss, perhaps due to the mishap, and somehow drops below 30% maintenance, you'll see that it begins smoking and causes an alert to display warning you that it's got low condition. If at any point the maintenance of a part hits 0%, then it fully breaks down and requires a component to be fixed before it will become functional again. Given the large amount of parts that you are likely to be using when supporting even a moderately sized grav ship, maintenance is going to be key for keeping your component stockpile healthy. Otherwise you'll find that you need to make frequent mining trips to score new screws, thingies and doohickeys from the nearby mountains. This need isn't exactly unfair either, with the decay rate being 1.6% per day at normal speed. That means even without any maintenance, a standard sensitivity gravship part lasts an entire year before it breaks down, so you would need to be actively ignoring the job to let things crap out most of the time. As well as this daily loss, there's also wear and tear accumulated per tile of travel when you take off. Again, it's a very minor amount, 0.1% per tile, so you'd need to travel 1,000 tiles in a single jump to make everything break at once. I did mention that sensitivity was a thing there though. Not all parts are created equal. Some parts are like an old Nokia, so you could throw it from a 4th story window onto concrete and have it function just fine, but others are like iPhones and would explode if you place it too aggressively onto a feather pillow. 100% sensitivity is considered low in terms of requirement. These are things like tanks or heat sinks. You'll be able to see that sensitivity on any part that uses this mechanic by opening its information page. It's listed in the building details. Medium sensitivity increases the rate of maintenance up to 200%. These are things like field extenders, consoles and thrusters, so you're likely going to have quite a few of these parts and they'll feel that wear and tear more frequently than other parts of your ship. It's highly likely that these will take up a good 70 to 80% of your maintenance time. Finally, you have parts that are extremely sensitive to this maintenance requirement, with a 300% rate. These parts are usually something that you only have one of, like the engine or an oxygen reclaimer. So whilst their demand is very high, breaking down in just 20 days without intervention, you aren't expected to have a ship full of these very delicate parts. If you find your ship is pretty massive and it feels like a never-ending battle against loose bolts, frayed wires, blown capacitors and such, the engineering console can help reduce that pretty significantly. Not only does it allow you to change the threshold for maintenance to take place, the thing that's normally set to 70%, but it also helps reduce the sensitivity of all parts on your ship by a flat 50%. As in, it lowers the maintenance sensitivity by 50%. It doesn't halve the sensitivity. So low parts become 50%, medium is 150, and high is now 250. You'll still be spending a good amount of time tuning up the engine and keeping your thrusters in good shape, but it basically makes the low maintenance parts of your ship no longer a concern. There is another part that can help you with this as well, a maintenance hub, which is available as a quest reward. These work in a similar manner to an engineering console, reducing the need for maintenance by a flat 25%, and your ship can support 2 of them. That means that a low maintenance part becomes a no maintenance part with these structures and offsets combined, outside of any mishaps that will rattle the ship around of course. It's extremely handy to keep your builders focused on other, more interesting tasks instead of tightening the bolts in the engine for the millionth time. Of course, maintenance isn't the only new difficulty that you're going to need to manage. If you hadn't already figured it out, vanilla grav engines work on magic, producing a huge amount of lift and working as an eternal power source. They don't really obey the laws of thermodynamics. Now there's a mechanic to show just how demanding these engines actually are, in the form of structural heat. Your ship will generate heat during launch and based on how much astrofuel has been burned in transit. Not only that, the size of your grav ship is taken into consideration as well. A small ship that's plastered with thrusters travelling halfway across the world is gonna get hot, whereas a Gravhulk making a short hop is barely gonna notice a rise in temperature. There's a whole formula behind this mechanic, with 1 unit of heat being produced per astrofuel consumed, that translates to a 1 degree increase in temperature divided by the size of the room, but it's a lot of math to get into when I can quite simply say the further away you go the hotter you get, which I'm fairly sure is what an X said about me. Knowing the VE team, they wouldn't throw a new mechanic at you without also giving you a way to interact with it or mitigate it. This is where heat sinks and absorbers come into play. Like most things on your Gravship, there are limits to how many of these parts you can place, with a full accompaniment of heatsinks providing a significant bonus to your ship. Small heatsinks store 10 heat units each, with a maximum of 10 being supported by your Grav engine, so that's potentially 100 units of heat absorption right there. Remember that each unit of burned astrofuel generates 1 heat. Now, these heat sinks are absorbing the temperature that would have otherwise been spread around your ship, which means if you build a dedicated room for heat sinks, it gets pretty damn hot. Fortunately, these aren't affected by wet weather, so having them placed externally on your ship and landing in a rainstorm isn't going to cause them to explode or short out your power grid. These heat sinks also convert that stored heat into usable energy whilst they're cooling down, as they dissipate 1 unit of heat per hour whilst also generating 100 watts. Whilst this isn't exactly a great deal of output, and it'll last at most 10 hours before the heat sinks totally cool off and no longer produce anything, it can still help with giving any batteries on board a little nudge in the right direction every time you land. And on the topic of landing, a small heatsink also lowers the Gravship's cooldown by 2%, so 20% once you've got all of them built. It's a pretty handy piece of kit, all things considered, although they're not exactly cheap to mass produce. Now that we know how the small heatsink works, you've probably got a pretty good idea about what the large heatsink is going to do. This stores up to 50 heat units, so 5 times as much as a smaller unit, without it being 5 times the price. A large heatsink is going to dissipate 2 units of heat energy per hour for 200 watts of power generation. So you can also see these have the potential to produce power for a longer duration as well, with a fully stocked large heatsink potentially lasting 25 hours, compared to the small one that cooled down after just 10. These large heatsinks also lower your Gravship cooldown by 5% each, with a ship able to support 6 of them. So if you've got all available heatsinks placed on board, that's halving your Gravship cooldown, meaning with a well-trained crew you can get even a Gravhulk ready to go in less than a day. Finally here you have the Grav Heat Absorber, which performs a very different job. The absorber is basically an emergency button with a 15-day cooldown, capable of instantly refreshing your Grav engine so it's ready to go again. If you land at a mission site and it immediately goes sideways, or if you were spotted upon landing by an opportunistic group of raiders that are rocking doomsday launchers, this works like a get out of jail free card, with just enough of a cooldown that you won't be able to reliably spam it, whilst also being accessible enough that you don't get analysis paralysis about using it either. Plus, it might not even be used for emergencies, you might just really want to get to a location as fast as possible. This makes that an accessible option. Alright, we've mentioned Astrofuel more than enough times now. Let's go over what it actually is. Rather than using chem fuel to power your Gravship, now you're using Astrofuel. This stuff burns hotter and more aggressively than chem fuel, with it capable of remaining alight even in a depressurized environment. That means an Astrofuel fire aboard your Gravship cannot be extinguished by simply opening an airlock. You'll need to treat this stuff with respect in terms of where you store it and how much of it you produce. Like most other vanilla expanded mods, Astrofuel comes with its own pipe network, featuring both visible and hidden pipes, valves, drains, taps and tanks. If by some miracle you haven't messed with a pipe network yet or seen one of my videos that goes over them, pipes work like conduits but for fluids, and they need to be built right up to a structure that wants to utilise them. They don't have any reach on their connection. Drains allow you to pour the resource into the pipeline, and taps allow you to draw the resource out. A pipe network is going to need at least 1 tank connected for it to function correctly, with any liquid poured into the drain being stored in the tank, provided there's enough space. You get 3 sizes of tank for Astrofuel, and just like the fuel tanks in Vanilla Odyssey, these can't be picked up and moved like most other Gravship components. So try to avoid wasting resources and make sure that you're placing your tanks in a spot that you intend to keep them where possible. These tanks will explode if they take too much damage as well, consuming the fuel within and creating an incredibly dangerous fire. So ideally you want your tanks to be behind a reinforced door and solid walls. The small tank takes 2x2 space, holds 250 fuel, working out at 62.5 fuel per tile of efficiency. The large tank needs 3x3 space and stores 750, meaning it's holding roughly 83.3 fuel per tile. The giant tank goes long rather than chunky and takes up 3x6 tiles worth of space, but it stores 1800 fuel, giving it the best ratio of 100 units of fuel per tile. Given that these tanks only need steel to build, spending a little bit extra early on can save you needing to replace or rebuild them in the long run. So how do we make this fuel then? It'll unlock at the biofuel refinery once we have basic Gravtech, and it takes 70 chem fuel and converts it into 35 units of astrofuel. This isn't a choice that you get to make either. It's not, do I want to use chem fuel or astrofuel? You have to use astrofuel in a Gravship. One place you do still have an option is with your power generators though, as GE includes both a standard and industrial generator that runs with astrofuel. Comparing that to a standard chem fuel generator, you see that you get more power and a longer runtime with the astrofuel version. Of course, that's 30 astrofuel being compared to 30 chem fuel, which is unfair, as it's actually 60 units of chem fuel that's burning in that astro generator, but it's 600 watts of additional power and another 3.3 days of runtime. It's pretty helpful when space aboard your Gravship is at a premium. Another part to consider with these astrofuel generators is that they do need to be constructed on Substructure 2. You can't use these to power a standard base unless you're doing all kinds of flooring shenanigans for them. The industrial sized generators do even better though. They take 3x3 floor space rather than 2x2, they store 20 days worth of fuel and output 3800 watts of power. So in terms of a tile by tile economy, you get 200 watts of additional power for each industrial compared to what a normal generator could output. For astrofuel, you also have a synthesizer. If you want to make this work even more efficiently, you're best to install ChemFuel Expanded, as this synthesizer can make use of the pipe network and storage as well. But it can operate without it too. It just becomes a little bit more labour intensive is all. This synthesizer converts 2 chem fuel into 1 astrofuel every 2 seconds, entirely automatically, which is probably why you want chem fuel pipes to keep it stocked rather than needing to manually pour chem fuel into it every few hours. This can save you a pretty significant amount of work at the biofuel refinery, and it has some amazing production chain potential thanks to things like the deep chem refinery or an infinite chem reactor. Given the ease of access to certain resources with a Gravship focused run, getting your fuel system almost entirely automated is especially rewarding. You just need to find a location with a good source of deep chem and stock up for the long haul. There are a couple more bits of kit that you can pick up from quest rewards that will help with your astrofuel production and consumption. The Astro Purifier needs to be placed next to your synthesizer, touching it. This is going to alter the automated production slightly, resulting in a 1x1 conversion rate, but it's going to double the amount of time it needs to process each unit of fuel. So now that's 1 chem fuel to 1 astrofuel every 4 seconds. Honestly, the downside is totally acceptable, and if you wanted to up the production rate of your fuel, you just need to build a second synthesizer. This purifier doesn't have a connection limit. However, only 1 purifier can connect to each synthesizer. You can't get more than a value of 1 to 1. But if you wanted to go all out with this thing, it supports up to 6 synthesizers at once, with that setup producing 1200 units of astrofuel per day, provided you've got the chem fuel to keep it all running, of course. We have a remade fuel optimizer too, now called the Astrofuel Optimizer. Your Gravship can support up to 4 of these, with each one providing a 15% saving on astrofuel consumption when performing a launch. It's nothing too crazy here, you're just going to need more of them than you did with base game Odyssey to get a similar saving, which makes sense given that your Gravships now have the potential to be much larger and travel a far greater distance. Cutting down consumption by 60% for just 2 buildings would have made fuel management a complete joke. In terms of resources, let's look at another new one that you're going to need to manage with Gravships: oxygen. If you thought it seemed a little bit too easy in vanilla just to plop down an oxygen pump and call it done, and let's be honest, that kind of is far too easy, you'll be happy to see that there's now not only a pipe network to manage, but also multiple production methods and changes to the vacuum resistance system. Firstly then, let's talk oxygen itself, or rather, an O2 canister. Each canister is equal to 1 unit of oxygen, with the resource itself being pretty volatile. If oxygen canisters are damaged or come into contact with fire, they fuse and explode, causing damage similar to a mechanoid thump cannon that's especially dangerous against structures and buildings, meaning that if you're in a bit of a pinch, you can use these to breach enemy walls or pack a little bit of extra punch with a shell and explosive drop. The pipe network is just like we covered for Astrofuel, so visible hidden pipes, valves, canister emptier, canister filler, as well as a small and large tank to connect to the network. These tanks can explode in a similar manner to canisters, only at a much larger scale. As such, you probably want to keep your fuel and oxygen networks pretty damn far away from each other, unless you're actively trying to turn your ship into a huge shrapnel grenade. The small tank holds 500 units of O2 with a 2x2 footprint, whereas the large can accommodate 1,200 units for a 3x3, so you squeeze out an extra 75 units by building the large tank, in terms of your tile economy anyway. You might prefer to build multiple small tanks and keep them separated across your Gravship though, as it avoids venting all of your O2 in a single mistake or bad event if you are relying on one large tank. You have a few different ways of generating oxygen to fill these tanks too. The harvester is the most straightforward device and likely to be what you build when you get started. This absorbs oxygen from the local atmosphere to fill the network at a rate of 10 units per in-game hour. So, as you'd expect, this is intended for use on the surface of a planet to allow for a limited orbital trip. Whilst working, these harvesters do draw a fair amount of power, about equal to a smelter, but fortunately if the O2 tanks are filled up, they automatically swap to a low power mode and consume only 20 watts, presenting a solid use case for the power provided by your heat sinks, as they allow your harvester to work without putting a lot of pressure on the power grid when you land surface side after some time in orbit. A final point to make with these harvesters is that they function absolutely fine in an airtight room that's still fully roofed. They won't somehow depressurize the interior of your ship by sucking the air out of the room and storing it in a tank instead, so you don't need to build all kinds of strange setups to have these work as intended. We already know about one method of outputting this O2, the vanilla oxygen pump. This now consumes 1 unit of oxygen per second to output 1% pressurization across 100 tiles. So there's a little bit of math in working out how much oxygen you need to fully saturate your ship in the case of a total depressurization from something like a breach or a vac barrier flicker. Fortunately, the numbers are straightforward to work with, so while the walls don't count towards those 100 tiles a pump is trying to pressurize, as they take space on the substructure but can't be oxygenated, a fairly safe number to work with is matching the O2 in your tanks to the connected substructure. If your ship has a footprint of 800, you either want 2 small tanks or 1 large tank. That will be capable of fully pressurizing your ship from empty and still hold enough in reserve to deal with any leaks or passive consumption. If you want to fill larger rooms a little bit quicker, you have the industrial oxygen pump too. This piece acts like a wall rather than an attachment, similar to a vanilla cooler. It pumps out 5 units of O2 per second, so it restores 5% pressurization over 100 tiles. This is also one of the few structures where going bigger doesn't actually increase your efficiency. It's still using just as much O2 to achieve the same outcome, with the upside being it does it considerably faster, so it's lowering the risk of any colonists caught in a breached area without a sealed helmet or a full vac suit. Of course, you're gonna want to be able to stay in space indefinitely at some point, right? This is where the next generator comes in, the algae oxygenator. Now, by itself, it's not going to be a whole lot of use to you, because it needs filling with oxyalgae to function. When it's working as intended, it consumes 1 unit of algae to make 1 unit of O2 every 12 seconds. This means it produces 1/3 of the O2 that a harvester does. Fortunately, it's not quite as power intensive, but you're still going to need a decent amount of these to ensure that your tanks aren't running the risk of going empty on an extended trip in orbit. And whilst these oxygenators may not be power hungry, you are then going to need hydroponics on board to grow the algae that they consume, which probably means you're rocking a sun lamp too. And all of a sudden, it's not quite that power efficient at all, is it? Needing hydroponics isn't negotiable either. The plants require 200% fertility as a minimum to grow, with a growing time of 5 days. Given that they're going to be in a hydroponics setup and experience 100% fertility sensitivity, it won't take long to harvest a fair amount of it. The biggest issue with gathering oxyalgae is that it spoils in just 1 day when outside of refrigeration, so you need a hauler to be paying attention. A harvest that's left overnight in the grow room is going to take a considerable toll on its lifespan. One fortunate thing is that whilst this does have a nutritional value, you won't be accidentally using it in meals or kibble, as it doesn't show up on the bills as a viable ingredient. So this is perfectly safe to leave in your freezer for storage before putting it into an oxygenator. There is one more structure that can produce oxygen for you, and it's available as a quest reward. Whilst the oxygen reclaimer won't walk 500 miles for you, certainly not 500 more, it can assist with offsetting your colonist breathing when in orbit, and it will help you to slowly refill tanks when planetside too. A Gravship can only support 4 reclaimers, with each one providing 30 units per day, or a baseliner and a half worth of consumption. They only need 100 watts of power to run, so they aren't expensive, and a full suite of these would allow a small 6-man craft to operate in space near indefinitely, outside of complications of course. Now then, let's go over changes to vacuum resistance and oxygen consumption, which we just kinda mentioned with the reclaimer. Resistance has been dropped across the board for all armours that previously provided it. A full vac suit now grants 97%, which equals about 40 hours of O2. Cataphract is 92, which translates to 14. Marine is down to 85, which is only 8 hours of O2. And Recon gets hit the hardest, granting only 80% resistance, which is just 6 hours of breathable oxygen. So why make this change? Well, you've now got an accessory that can be paired with this gear to make use of those O2 canisters you've been creating, and allow all of these suits to be just as viable as one another. The oxygen pack can be crafted at a machining table. It costs just one component, 20 steel and 75 O2. That 75 oxygen is also its air capacity when equipped, and it can be refilled using one O2 canister per missing unit. You're also getting a secondary bonus from having an oxygen pack equipped of an 80% toxic environment resistance, but its primary function is to set vacuum resistance to 100%, as long as other criteria are met. First of all, the wearer needs to be in a vacuum for this to start consuming any stored oxygen. You'll be glad to hear that colonists aren't giving themselves hyperoxia whenever they feel like it. Whilst this pack is capable of providing total vacuum resistance, the colonist will need to be wearing other gear that can provide at least 12% resistance as a baseline. Think of this like the O2 pack actually needing something to interface with and create that airtight seal. You can't just slap a plastic rebreather over your face, put on your dust dart and call it done. So whilst a set of recon armour would have normally been only providing 6 hours of O2, if it's paired with an oxygen pack, you'll be armoured, mobile, and gassed up. This means you can get away from wearing the cumbersome vac suits with middling protection purely for their large O2 duration, and whilst a vac suit still works fantastically in terms of its oxygen longevity, the same effect can now be achieved by pairing armour you want to wear with an O2 pack. Let's talk about consumption in slightly more detail, shall we? What does 75 units of O2 actually translate to when it's worn by a colonist? A baseliner consumes 20 units of O2 per day. This is why you're going to want extra O2 in the tanks if you're travelling with only harvesters aboard your Gravship, because there will still need to be a trickle of fresh oxygen added to the ship to replace what your colonists are breathing. To plan how much you actually need to build on your ship to support a spacefaring colony indefinitely, we can work out that a single algae oxygenator produces 80 units of O2 per day, provided it's always fueled. So that's one oxygenator and 12 hydroponics per 4 baseline colonists to break even. Much like many things in Rimworld, breaking even is never quite enough, because as soon as something goes wrong, you're now on the back foot. Think a power cut causing your algae to spoil, tanks rupturing and potentially losing that stored O2, or blights hitting your hydroponic room. Oxygen consumption isn't static either. Colonists will consume oxygen in relation to their body size. So children need less, but a hulking xenotype is going to take more. Equally, if you're playing with sanguiphages or androids, they don't breathe, so they won't consume any. I did say at the top of this rundown that GE adds considerably more to manage with your Gravship. It is, however, infinitely more satisfying to build a self-sustainable Gravship with all of these systems working in harmony. One last part to mention with the O2 and vacuum is the inclusion of a new spot, the Vac Checkpoint. Colonists won't cross tiles marked with this unless they're wearing the required amount of vacuum resistance. Extremely helpful for stopping idiots wandering through a vac barrier to have a look at the cosmos whilst they bleed from their eyes and ears. You'll also notice that you do now have additional sizes for your vac barriers, with a 2x1, a 3x1 and a 5x1. These get more expensive as they increase in size, but function identically to a standard barrier. It just makes it a little bit easier to flood in or out of certain areas, rather than needing to dogpile through a single tile of space. As well as that, you've now got the option to change the colour of that vac barrier, meaning you can match it with your ship aesthetic or use it to visually designate an area as low, medium or high decompression risk. So, on to something else. You've now got a lot of dedicated Gravship furniture to play with. Pairing this with the spacer module from Furniture Expanded gives you all kinds of options for both lavish rooms and tight crew quarters. You can design the ship of your dreams, basically. The GravCore power cell is something that you should already be familiar with from Vanilla Odyssey, being nicely accessible in the tech tree and boasting a new bonus too. GravCore power cells now enhance the effect of other power cells placed nearby, with up to 8 cells working in harmony. Each cell will grant nearby cells 15% additional power, which caps at 120%. That means a group of 8 power cells suddenly goes from making 8,000 watts to 17,600 watts. If for some reason you still need more than that, a second group needs to be built at least 7 tiles away from that original 8, as they have a maximum amount of connections that they can support, and it causes issues with how the bonus is worked out across groupings. If you want to make the best of that stacking power bonus, you can also build power coils close to those cells as well. As standard, a power coil outputs 5,000 watts. With it having quite a hefty upfront cost, it makes it more appealing to build a bunch of power cells that can stack and assist each other first when you're getting started. Fortunately, once you manage to hit that bonus cap by building 8 cells, the coil now benefits from all of it, without even needing to replace one of those cells. This allows you to add an additional 11,000 watts of power to your grid by placing a single power coil close to the cell network, whenever you need a casual 3 geothermals worth of output from a single structure. Of course, this stuff is pretty late game in terms of its costing and time investment to find all the necessary grav cores, but it's definitely something you can aspire to have aboard your ship. Dream big, all that. You might want more standard power options to begin with though, ones that are a little bit less expensive to get going. Gravship solar paneling can be placed as an individual tile wherever you would like, provided it's on substructure, obviously. These provide more power in terms of tile economy when compared to a normal solar panel, but they're extremely fragile and expensive, as they take grav-light panels and components to build. So whilst 16 Gravship solar panels would output 3,200 watts of power, compared to a standard solar panel's 1,700, it's costing you significantly more to build that. On the plus side, this can be placed on Gravship sub-scaffold. So if you hollow out an area inside your ship and fill it with these, it's not going to be counting towards the substructure limit, and still provides a great amount of electricity for whatever you need. In terms of storing that power, you can now build Gravship capacitors. These also need to be placed on substructure, as they are buried in the floor, working just like a battery, or a very expensive battery. They hold up to 1,500 watts and lose 10 watts of power per day. They charge with the same efficiency as a standard battery, but because they're tucked neatly into the substructure, colonists can walk over them and they don't get in the way, allowing you to fill your corridors or walkways with batteries, and it doesn't make the traversal of your ship a complete nightmare. Even though these batteries are held in substructure, you can reinstall them wherever you need to. Presumably you just pop the flooring on and off as required, like a spaceship manhole cover. You can make them even better with a capacitor harmonizer, which is available as a quest reward. This can connect to up to 20 capacitors in a pretty massive radius around itself. It looks like about 16 tiles, and it boosts the charging efficiency up to 100% and removes that 10 watts of daily self-discharge. If you're investing deep into systems that have fluctuating power consumption, like sun lamps, this can save you a lot of headache when trying to work out how much extra power you're going to need to charge the batteries when work hours are no longer active. Like how the UK had to invent its own solution to stop the country blacking out whenever work finished, as everyone arrived home and turned the kettle on to make a cup of tea. I wish I could say I was joking about that. We really are that ridiculous of a country. One part that I'm really happy to see included are compact workbenches. These work exactly the same as their larger counterparts, but take less space, with the caveat being that they must be placed on substructure. You can't build these in a normal base. The stove, drug lab, machine table, smithy, tailoring bench and biofuel refinery all take 2x1 tiles of space, with the fabrication bench and comms terminal being condensed into a 3x1 instead. All things considered, this makes it incredibly easy to kit out an entire workshop, with just a couple of tool cabinets providing everything with a solid work speed bonus, whilst not needing to dedicate a massive chunk of your grav ship to production chains. In terms of space saving, you now also have access to bunk beds. This allows two colonists to sleep on top of each other without any risk of pregnancy. The beds must be placed on substructure and will always turn the room they are placed in to a barracks, so you'll need to manage the mood offsets around a shared living space if you plan to use them. Bunk beds can also connect to a new structure of a crew locker, which again needs to be placed on substructure. These lockers take the place of an end table and a dresser, as those buildings can't connect to bunk beds. Lockers have a good amount of reach and connect to multiple bunk beds at once, but bunk beds can only benefit from a single locker. These push the comfort of a bunk bed up by 0.1, meaning that a bunk bed only needs to be good quality to reach maximum comfort when paired with a locker. Just be aware that this furniture must be made from metal. There's only one bit of Gravship furniture that can be made out of wood. The Gravship shelf takes its base material and some Gravlite panels, resulting in a storage solution that can hold 6 stacks per tile, so 12 across the shelf. Given how demanding Gravships can be in terms of space optimization needs, this is easily one of the quickest solutions to turn a storeroom from an absolute nightmare into a one-stop shop for everything you need, neatly organised and easily accessible. As another space-saving option, you have the Med Bay bed. This pairs a vitals monitor into a medical bed in an extremely handy package. Again, this needs to be placed on substructure, but it allows you to make a hospital with an incredibly small footprint. They are a little bit hungry on components and Gravlite panels, but it's no more than you would have paid for a dedicated hospital bed and vitals monitor anyway. These can also be connected to a crew locker, so if you want to ensure that your patients are as comfortable as possible, make sure you've got one placed in your medical facility too. If you looked at all the parts around oxygen demand and couldn't be bothered to deal with sun lamps and hydroponics, I'm sure you'll be happy to hear that there is a super easy option for you instead: the Agro Cell. Not to be confused with people who defend Andrew Tate on Twitter and claim that women are the cause of all their problems. This is a 3x1 structure that comes with a built-in sun lamp, 320% soil fertility, and best of all, it slots very neatly into the substructure, just like the Gravship capacitor did. These consume more power than a standard hydroponics basin when they're active, but you aren't as tied into filling an entire area with them, like you usually are with hydroponics because of the use of a very power-hungry sun lamp. So swings and roundabouts. Again, you don't need to make a dedicated room for these. You can have them dotted around in bedroom floors, corridors, or even your storerooms. If you want to use these to grow algae for your O2, you need to use slightly more of them than you would a hydroponics basin, because you only get 3 plants in these rather than 4. For some really easy bits of space saving that translate nicely over to the regular base too, provided you've got the research to unlock them anyway, you have the Wall Fire Foam Popper and the Wall Orbital Trade Beacon. These provide exactly the same radius as their normal version, they just keep the clutter off of your flooring, giving you more space to build aggro cells or capacitors. If you're missing that little pop of beauty around your Gravship, there's a solution for you in the form of the faux plant, basically an IKEA special that grants a bonus to beauty in the local area. This doesn't need water, light or oxygen to survive, but crew members who use words like pacifically, espresso and pedal stool will insist that they're doing a really good job of looking after it. Finally here you have the Sealant Popper. This is both extremely niche, but potentially run saving at the same time. If you have a spot on your Gravship that seems to attract raiders like crazy and frequently suffers from breaches, or an area that has vac barriers leading directly inside your ship, a Sealant Popper will help block the breach or leak and prevent your entire ship from decompressing. It can automatically fire when it notices that the surrounding vacuum has reached 25%. Just make sure that once its job is done, Swansea is actually working on removing the foam, not just slacking off getting drunk on mouthwash again. Now comes the more lethal parts of your Gravship. Bear in mind that with Chapter 1 we are playing with what's essentially half a deck, maybe not even that. The more powerful arsenal and utilities available to you are being reserved for release with Chapter 2, which will also introduce Gravship to Gravship combat, so you're going to have a solid reason to bring more weapons with you than the average American student. Just like we had with Gravship Research and Maintenance, we also get a stat dedicated to Gravship targeting. This offset pulls from similar stats to mortar accuracy, using shooting and intellectual to help you offset the miss radius when firing Gravship weapons across the world map, as well as impacting the speed that salvos can be unloaded. That means that, yes, you get the option to bombard world map tiles, but you need to be able to actually target them directly. You can't just select a random tile that you have no presence on and bomb it to shit. You need a colonist present there to generate the tile first, and then you can more accurately aim your bombardment. Firing bombardments in this way will cause them to get progressively less accurate as the distance grows. Given that your Gravship can move, there's no reason that you wouldn't just park it a couple of tiles away and get the best chances of a direct hit. Of course, to make good use of this mechanic, you're either going to be running a Gravship and an expeditionary force, or potentially supporting your ground base with fire from a Gravship that's floating in orbit above it, as this mechanic does work across layers. Just be aware that not all weapons are capable of this. Some are dedicated to defense or treated as a more beefy security option, so let's actually get into these weapons. First off, we have a part that you are required to make if you're intending to operate Gravship artillery, the targeting terminal. These are cheap enough to build and for good reason. You need one of these for each weapon you build except for a point defense turret. These armaments are massive after all and do not come with pre-installed AI targeting cores, so before you go plastering an entire side of your Gravship with artillery, make sure you've actually got the manpower to make use of them. As a quick side note, if you happen to run an army of child soldiers, or just generally lack a vibe of morality, telling kids that the terminal lets them play a super realistic tower defense game will let your adult combatants take a fight directly whilst being supported with shots from the ship. Now, if you did want to automate any of your turrets, it's going to cost you a little bit more, and you'll need to dabble into mechanics from Biotech. The operator sub-persona core requires a high sub-core to build, so you'll need someone who's already made a little bit of progress along the Mechanator questline to get your hands on this. If you don't own Biotech, these aren't an option for you. But seriously, you don't own Biotech? That's the best DLC. Anyway, just like the targeting terminal, one of these can manage a single turret, with it functioning the same as a colonist with 90% Gravship targeting. making it equal to a baseline colonist that has no health conditions and 9 skill in either shooting or intellectual, or some combination thereof, like 3 shoot, 6 int. That means for the most part, a colonist with even a passing interest in ranged combat or research will perform better than a sub-persona. If you happen to have someone passionate in both shooting and intellectual with a high skill in both, it's not remotely close. For something that can beat a colonist, however, you need to find a gunner sub-persona core. This only comes about from quests. Only 2 of these can be supported per Gravship, and you'll want them connected to your best weaponry, as they boast a targeting stat of 300%. A baseline colonist with no health conditions or implants and a maxed skill in both intellectual and shooting hits 225 targeting, so that gives you some idea of how potent these cores actually are. They can greatly help in offsetting any penalties applied when firing over a vast distance, but you might need to get into the habit of swapping what they're connected to on a fight-by-fight basis, as you want the most bang for your buck with this kind of combat potential. Let's go over a turret that's fully automated first, without the need for any terminals or cores. A point defense turret. All Gravship weapons take 3x3 tiles of space and understandably need to be constructed on top of a substructure. This drone has somewhat limited range, but it provides automated protection against drop pods and incoming explosives. Just be aware that it's less brat and more pop pop, as it can attempt about 4 intersections per second, with not all shots being successful. So if you want to reliably block a large amount of incoming risks, you need a solid battery of these guns working in tandem to create a wall of bullets. They need steel to rearm too, using 1 per shot and storing up to 75 in total. So once they're built, they're not actually that expensive to run. Next we have the Gauss Gun. This is essentially your standard cannon, working like a uranium slug turret that had a particularly bad breakup and spent every day over the next 6 months at the gym. It does have a minimum range, meaning targets that get too close are safe from its shots, but it can easily hit anything outside of that on both your own tile and any site on the world map up to 16 tiles away, again becoming less accurate over a greater distance. As well as being fairly expensive to build, this thing will chew through uranium and requires either a manned terminal or a connected sub-persona to operate, so you might want to preemptively turn turrets like this by forcing a shot at the ground in the direction that you would like them to face, as their aiming time doesn't start ticking down until the turret has turned to the correct direction. Meaning if you place a large group of turrets on the south side of your ship and they're all facing north, you have to wait a few seconds for them to spin around before they even start drawing a bead on the enemy. Admittedly, it's only a few seconds, but that might be the difference that lets you get an entire extra shot off. These projectiles are counted as something that can be intercepted, so thinking ahead, in the Chapter 2 release of the mod, you're going to need point defense turrets to intercept shells from enemies using Gauss guns. Finally, with this option, it isn't reloaded manually. You need to make use of Gauss shell ammo boxes that you can build. When placed next to a turret, these will be consumed once it's depleted all of its ammunition. Unlike most other stored projectiles, they don't appear to be an explosive or combustible risk. So yes, they can still be hit by stray shots and destroyed, which is going to lose you some of the uranium that you spent building them, but they won't fuse and explode, likely destroying the turret and any walls nearby. I'm kinda hoping with the release of Chapter 2 for GE, we see something similar to a pipeline network but for shells, similar to how large belt-fed weapons work. It would allow us to build a loading room in one part of the ship and then manage all of our torpedoes, shells and missiles from there. Onto the Javelin Pod. This is another option that can fire across the entire tile and the world map, with a range equal to the Gauss Gun. This swaps the cost of uranium for astrofuel, and given that you can have an entire production chain automated, turning chem fuel into astrofuel and then pipe it directly to the turrets to automate reloading them, this is likely the go-to in terms of your cost efficiency. However, the Javelin Pod blows its entire load in one go. Remember that time you spent an entire evening making out on the sofa before actually heading to the bedroom? She said not to worry about it, but that still creeps into your brain at 1 AM when you can't sleep. Do you think it's the same for her? Wait, what were we on about? Oh, big pant-wetting explosions. The Gauss Gun is able to regulate its shots, so it tends to do less overkill and offers a wider splash radius per shell, meaning that your uranium will go much further than the astrofuel in a Javelin Pod would. It'll be absolutely chugging through it. It comes down to what you really need and how you're approaching combat. Ultimately, scuffing a shot with a Javelin feels terrible, whereas a single round going wide from a Gauss Gun isn't the end of the world. But if you're looking to utterly annihilate the raid in a single shot, only the Javelin is really going to offer that kind of power. Finally, you have the Anticraft Caster. This can fire across the world map, but the ship that it's built on needs to be in orbit for that to work, as it's drawing a straight line from the turret to the target. You can't do that from a grounded position because the world isn't flat. Although, weirdly, the caster will happily fire its shots through a mountain on your local tile, so whilst the world may not be flat, maybe it's hollow? This weapon boasts the largest range of all, as well as the highest density of shots, but it does lower damage and it works more like a laser minigun, so its spattering of shots is often interrupted when the initial target dies, and when it does hit something, it tends to wing them rather than outright murder them. The caster also uses 50,000 watts of power when firing, so everything I said earlier about building lots of power coils and cells being overkill, that's not the case if you're using one of these. Now, this thing does fill a role that I don't think really exists yet within the release of Chapter 1. It's very clearly a weapon best suited for ship-to-ship combat, with its primary goal being to overwhelm enemies' shield systems. You pepper it with this rapid, high-intensity laser attack, and then you sneak your missiles and slug salvos in to bypass that defense. That's not to say you can't try and make use of these on your grav ship, only that they're extremely inefficient both in their power consumption and the impact against basically all humanoid targets. But these might still come in very handy against a massive mechanoid, an insectoid, a vehicular threat, or maybe even an anomaly, as it needs something that allows it to wind up and unleash its full salvo without interruption. The last bits to mention will only be in the game if you're using the other DLC. I've already mentioned the Operator Sub-Persona Core for your Gravship artillery, but there's a little bit more you get from Biotech as well, namely the Hunter, Astropede and Astronaut mechanoids. All three of these perform better in space than your colonists will. The Astronaut is unlocked with basic mech tech, giving you a mech that handles both firefighting and construction, which means this is also capable of performing Gravship maintenance tasks. These come in especially handy when your hull has been battered by space debris and the like, as they're able to quickly hop out, fly around the outside of the ship, and handle all the repairs in a clean sweep, without needing to navigate interior corridors and rooms. The Hunter and Astropede both unlock through high mech tech. The Hunter is able to seek out slow-moving prey caught in space and obliterate it with a twin-linked missile launcher. This weapon does have fairly stunted range, so it needs to get in close to do real damage, but thanks to its free movement in space, it can easily kite enemies that rely on melee attacks. The Astropede makes use of a mass lance, which has a little bit more range than the Hunter's missiles, but not much. Instead of firing two weaker shots, the mass lance unleashes a single massive explosion, best suited for breaching or removing cover from your enemies. It's likely that these mechanoids will see significantly more use with the release of Chapter 2, but for now, they're fun to intercept pirates with when they're foolish enough to turn up with a melee weapon. If you own Royalty, you'll get both the Prestige Vac Suit and the Prestige Vac Suit Helmet. These work exactly as you'd expect. They provide additional psychic sensitivity and neural heat recovery for your Psycasters, fulfilling the apparel needs of a titled colonist and costing some additional resources, as well as a good chunk of gold, to create. Whilst it does make sense to have a prestige variant of this suit, the helmet is the standout point thanks to its armour and coverage. The move speed penalty on the Vac suit itself still makes it super unappealing to wear outside of an emergency spacewalk. For your ideology options, you've been given 3 new specialists: All of these are unlocked with the Shipborne meme. The Piloting Specialist role grants a 50% bonus to your piloting ability on the assigned colonist, as well as letting them call for an emergency launch. You need to be able to cast the ability on a piloting console, so your specialist does need to make it there to trigger this effect. Having them bleeding out on the floor outside of the Gravship doesn't help at all. This ability overrides the cooldown requirement for your Grav engine, with the ability itself only having a 3-day cooldown. Using this to lift off is always going to result in a mishap upon landing, and throw you in a completely random direction for an equally random amount of tiles, potentially landing you somewhere more dangerous than you were trying to escape from. Not only that, you're getting absolutely zero grav data for this flight because it was so rushed. This ability is the very embodiment of fuck it, we ball. The Navigator is a odd title for this role, I find. Navigator sounds more like a co-pilot, whereas all of the abilities and bonuses for this specialist read like an astronomer. The assigned colonist gets a 50% bonus to Gravtech Research, as well as the ability to analyse the stars. They're going to need a telescope to target with this, and once cast it goes on a 10-day cooldown. This allows them to locate a new orbital location for you to go and explore, as well as giving you the option to name it too. Just be aware that these asteroids won't always spawn within an immediately reachable distance of your current position. It could be on the arse end of the planet compared to where you currently are. Finally, there's the Engineering Specialist, which grants a bonus to Gravship maintenance as well as construction speed and general labour speed, making this easily one of the most instantly beneficial roles to hand out. Similar to what other, more base game roles have, this gives you a command aura. Engineering Command boosts the construction, maintenance and labour skills of anyone nearby for 24 hours. Extremely helpful if you have a particularly bad landing and find that your most sensitive equipment is about an hour away from becoming a real emergency. But equally useful for you to get a new section of the ship constructed lickety-split. As for Anomaly integrations, what are you, stupid? Nobody makes Anomaly content. And that's all for Chapter 1. Chapter 2 is still some ways off at time of recording. To preempt the question in the comments, nah, don't bother waiting around for Chapter 2 to release before you play this. Get some runs under your belt with a Gravship that has actual mechanical depth, so that when Chapter 2 does release, you can get something up and running right away to jump into a space battle. This is another case of a DLC providing a framework, and the modding community taking it and sculpting it into what many people had built it up in their heads to be, before they'd actually played with it. I remember seeing the discussions when Odyssey was announced about how cool space battles would be, how awesome all the subsystems and mechanics could be, and whilst I tried to temper people's expectations in my own coverage on the DLC notes, some refused to believe that it would release without, well, essentially everything that they wanted. Now there's a really nice middle ground to play with thanks to workshop content that's available. You can go as simple as base game Odyssey, or as overwhelming as SOS. Vanilla Gravship Expanded is that third bowl of porridge. It's not too hot, not too cold. Something you can pick up right away and just get stuck in with. If you'd like to see what I'm working on next and get insights into any upcoming projects, it's available to view on my Patreon page. All the posts there are free to read, and if you would like, you can support me in producing content for £1 a month. It gets your name in the credits of these videos and it helps me to stay alive. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon or evening. Take care.
It's been a good day, good night.